Now, as mentioned before, we can only use gerunds and two infinitive phrases as objects with certain verbs. And there are certain verbs that can take both gerunds and two infinitive phrases as objects. Let's look at some example sentences. I like playing football. I like to play football. I hate losing. I hate to lose. I love listening to music. I love to listen to music. As shown by these examples, the verbs like, hate, and love can all take both the two infinitive phrase and gerund as an object, and there is no difference in meaning between these sentences. Some other verbs that can take both the two infinitive phrase and gerunds as objects are prefer, start, try, and begin. And again, there is very little difference in meaning between gerunds as objects and two infinitive phrases as objects. However, some verbs can take both the gerund and the two infinitive phrase as objects, and the meaning is different. A good example of this is the verb remember. Consider these sentences. Please remember to bring your books. I remember playing football with friends. The verb remember can take both the two infinitive phrase and a gerund as an object. And when it does, the two infinitive phrase relates to something in the future and the gerund relates to something in the past. And this also applies to the verb regret, like in these sentences. We regret to announce the cancellation of the shows. We regret cancelling the shows. So this time the two infinitive phrase relates to something that's happening now, and the gerund relates to something in the past. Lastly, some verbs can be followed by both a two infinitive phrase and a gerund, but they are not both objects. A good example is the verb stop. Consider these sentences. We stopped to have lunch. We stopped having lunch. We saw this first sentence in the lesson before, and the two infinitive phrase to have lunch tells us the purpose of the main verb. It tells us why we stopped, so it functions as an adverb. However, the gerund in the second sentence is the object of the verb stopped, so it tells us what we stopped. We do have a resource sheet with an extensive list of verb patterns, so please do refer to that to learn about other verbs that follow the pattern we learned today. So today we learned about verbs that can take both a two infinitive phrase and a gerund as an object, and how sometimes they can mean the same thing, but at other times they are different in meaning. In the next, begin with verbs that take gerunds as objects. Here are some example sentences. I enjoy playing golf. He keeps playing video games. I miss going to the beach. So these verbs enjoy, keep, and miss are some of the verbs that can only be followed by gerunds as objects. So what I enjoy is playing golf. What he keeps doing is playing video games, and what I miss is going to the beach. And it's important to note that these verbs cannot be followed by a two infinitive phrase as objects or adverbs. So we can't say I enjoy to play, he keeps to play, and I miss to go. These structures are grammatically incorrect. Again, the resource sheet has an extensive list of verbs that can be directly followed by gerunds as objects. So please do refer to that to learn more about other verbs that follow this pattern. Let's now look at verbs that are directly followed by two infinitive phrases as objects. Here are some example sentences. I want to go home. She hopes to go traveling next year. We agreed to help them. So the verbs want, hope, and agree are some of the verbs which can be followed by the to infinitive phrase as an object. So what I want is to go home, what she hopes is to go traveling next year, and what we agreed is to help them. Similar to the verbs which can only be followed by gerunds as objects, these verbs can only be followed by a to infinitive phrase. So we can't say want going, hopes going, and agreed helping. These structures are grammatically incorrect. Again, please do refer to the document in the resource section for an extensive list of verbs and their patterns. Okay, so today we learned about verbs which can be followed by a gerund as an object or a to infinitive phrase as an object. Let's look at some example sentences that use this structure. My friend advised me to exercise. I persuaded him to stay. My parents taught me to be kind. So in these sentences we have a verb, an object, and a to infinitive phrase. And the to infinitive phrase tells us what my friend advised, what I persuaded my friend to do, and what my parents taught me. So in essence, the pronouns are the indirect objects, and the to infinitive phrases are the direct objects of the verbs. Verbs like advise, persuade, and teach cannot be followed directly by to infinitive phrases as objects. So we can't say, my friend advised to exercise, I persuaded to stay, or my parents taught to be kind. However, some verbs can be followed directly by an infinitive phrase, or followed by an object and then a to infinitive phrase. Here are some examples of these verbs. I prefer to eat pizza. I prefer him to eat pizza. I want to read a book. I want him to read a book. So in the sentences where the verbs are directly followed by a to infinitive phrase, the sentences express what I prefer and what I want. However, in sentences where the to infinitive phrase follows an object, the sentences express what I prefer the object to eat and what I want the object to read. So the meaning is different between the two sentences. Let's look at more examples of verbs that follow the pattern of object and then a to infinitive phrase. My teacher recommended me to read this book. I told him to take a break. John asked me to get some milk. So the verbs recommend, tell, and ask can also follow this pattern of an object and a to infinitive phrase. As always, for more extensive list of verbs that follow this pattern, please refer to the resource sheet for more information. Okay, so today we learned about verbs that are followed by objects and then to infinitive phrases. In the next lesson,
Subscribe dong English tutorial.